that's why the change in the agenda format for this meeting. Moving on to the presentation. As a continuation of Director Ranche's educational series, trying to of course, discuss topics of interest, similar to the presentation on the housing survey and other presentations provided. Understanding there's been some discussion about abatement and public finance tools, and perhaps the difference between abatement and tax increment financing, and how they relate and how they don't relate, and what they can be used for and what they can't be used for. The thought was to bring to you all kind of a high-level course on what the state authorizes in terms of abatement use. We won't dive too much into tax increment financing today. If I would have done that, Commissioner Joe would definitely be here past the 7 o'clock deadline, so we'll save a tax increment finance discussion for another day. But abatement is a little bit simpler of a topic, so we thought we'd start there. This presentation is a little bit text heavy, but the intent was to be less of a presentation necessarily, but more of a resource. So this is something that the EDA or the council or the public can use as a resource to refer to wrap their head around what abatement is and how it works and how it applies in Hermantown specifically. Talked about the exploring mechanics of TIF at a later date. And then to note, in that title page here, I've got public financing tools for development. Oftentimes, tools like abatement or tax increment financing are referred to as incentives, and it's a little bit semantics, I would argue, but I like to refer to them as public financing tools because we participate in the financials of a development. And this presentation, I should note, relates largely to how tax abatement works for development projects, not necessarily how a municipality might use abatement to finance a new building or to buy squad cars or anything like that. This is really, because this is EDA, this is really focused on how it's used for economic development. Referring to it as public financing rather than incentives, as a city, we through abatement or through tax increment financing, we are participating in the financial stack. So when you think about the way that the financials work for a project, we're one of those items in the finances, right? We are essentially participating in the financial structure. And the reason it qualifies as financing, in my interpretation of it, is because we are getting a return on investment. A bank invests in a project, they finance a project, and they get bank fees, they get interest payments, we don't quantify it that way through abatement or through increment. We quantify it more in the public benefit and return on investment that comes through the public benefit. But that's why I like to call it public financing rather than incentives, because though it can be argued as semantics, I do think they're different. I will move on to the first page and kind of define the two. I broke my mouse before this meeting, so you'll have to have patience as I figure out how to use this thing. I'll do that. So again, this won't be a tax increment financing presentation, but in order to a little bit distinguish at the beginning, I discuss both. And some of this is just going to be me reading for you, but tax abatement and highlighting some of the key terms within the definitions and the scenarios later in the presentation. But tax abatement is a time-limited public financing tool where property taxes on an individual parcel, and that's important, are levied and paid, but a portion of those taxes are dedicated by resolution from City Council to reimburse eligible project costs. And they have to be eligible project costs. They can't be just for anything willy-nilly. Or to fund public infrastructure. So it's either done by reimbursing the developer or bondholder representatives, so they can bond against it. So reimbursing the developer, or the city can actually retain the abatement and pay for the costs themselves. Reimbursement is the most common mechanism. It's the most common mechanism. On tax increment financing, on on the other hand, often just referred to as TIF, is a public financing tool, again, where property taxes on the increased value, so the increment, right, like whatever the development creates, or is forecasted to create in taxable value, that gets captured, and then they use that to pay qualifying costs, that enable the development to occur that would not otherwise, but for the financing, and that's a key piece, in tax increment financing, is that state law, mandates that the project has to be proven to not be economically viable, but for the TIF. Tax abatement does not have that requirement. Our policy is that, you know, that's one of the metrics that we use to base whether or not abatement would be granted, but it's not required by statute.
And with tax abatement, it's negotiable how much of their taxes paid go to the project, and the rest goes to the general fund, if you will, correct?
Yeah, it is negotiable, and arguably so is TIF. TIF, you use your forecast to be able to figure out what your ceiling is, and you can negotiate either a cap on that, or you also negotiate the interest rate paid on that. So that is also negotiable. The intent of public financing is typically only to provide what is necessary or needed, just because you want to maximize the tax benefits while also maximizing the public benefits that happen from economic impact. So there's a negotiation there where the city's opinion of what maximum benefit on both sides may be different than the opinion of the developer on maximum benefit on both sides, so that's where that negotiation happens. On the tax abatement side, it's forecasted also what the tax increase will be on the parcel level, and then you can negotiate from there as well, on whether it's a full abatement or whether there's a partial abatement. So and we'll get into the spread a little bit more, but good question. Okay. The mechanics of abatement. What I've done here is I've tried to create like a simple chart that's just kind of like a hypothetical of how abatement would work, just to kind of graphically convey the tax implications around abatement. So the base tax at the bottom, that's that tan bucket. Let's say the parcel, again, abatement is done on a parcel by parcel basis. Let's say that the parcel today is generating $5,000 worth of taxes. After a project is completed, it's forecasted through working with the county and working to establish, you know, what their assessed value would be and how much taxes would be created annually, factoring in inflation and all of that stuff. What would the taxes generated be after the project is completed? And so that sets the ceiling on the abatement, and we typically only abate, you can abate it all, but we typically only abate everything that was created. So we tend to keep the base tax and negotiate within the created tax amount.
And that's similar to TIF.
Similar to TIF, yep. The difference with TIF is that you can't take the base value, that gets frozen, but you only capture the increment, you can't take from the base value.
But you're saying generally we leave the base where it was.
Correct. Generally we do. And so in this hypothetical on your screen, $145,000 worth of taxes are created, $150,000 of taxes are created, so there's $155,000 a year of taxes total. And through the negotiation, through the discussion, through evaluating what the impact is for public benefit versus the economics of the project, it's negotiated to be $100,000 in abatement value. So all of those taxes are paid, but then rebated or dedicated taxes of $100,000 go back to the developer in this instance. $50,000 still goes to the city, and this is only looking at city, right? There's also the county and there's also the school, and we'll get into that stuff. But there's still new revenue for the city in this illustration, and then you've got the $100,000 that are dedicated to whatever the eligible costs would be that were identified in the project. So just trying to put a graphic explanation to how the abatement actually works and pull it out of text, because everybody's different. I learned by doing, some people learn by seeing, some people learn by hearing. moving forward, the difference with TIF and the TIF concept, just for comparison. Before I get into the graphic, the big difference between tax abatement and tax increment is that increment is district-based. So abatement is only parcel by parcel. You can't do an abatement for multiple parcels unless you have separate agreements. With tax increment, it's you draw a district, that district gets created, it gets certified, it goes through a whole statutory process, and then you grab all of the increment that happens, whether the parcels are invested in or not as a part of the project, and you capture all of the taxes that are created as a part of that project within the entire district rather than a parcel level. So the graphic on the left is the taxable value of the district, right? That geographic boundary that you're capturing from, and on the bottom is the time. And you'll see typically when you do a tax increment financing district, typically the value of the property is declining. You're not typically redeveloping something or building on something that is having an increase in tax value. Not typically, sometimes it does. But for graphic purposes, I'm showing the typical. Once the tax increment district is created, that tax base, like we're talking about, Commissioner Geisler, gets frozen. And that stays the same throughout the course of the entire district. The project gets built, and depending on the schedule, sometimes you capture taxes, 2-year schedule, you capture taxes halfway through. But then at the end of the project, all of the taxes that were created from the project get captured depending on what the time of the district is, and we're not getting into the different districts today. It can be anywhere from 9 years to 26 years. And so all of that forecasted increment gets captured, and then typically it's linked against. So the developer will take the promissory note, right, the TIF note, and they'll take it to a lender, and the lender will borrow against it, and then the TIF revenues will be used to pay the debt service. Typically how that's how it works. And then once the TIF district is complete, and that's typically, again, doesn't have to go the full length of the term, but it can. And once it goes offline, then all of that goes right back onto the tax base, so you get a huge bump all of a sudden when the district is done. So again, the main differences are district-based, and you capture all the increment and use it up front to pay all of that increment, and use it up front to pay for the eligible costs within the project.
How do they determine 9 to 26 years?
Statute defines all of that. So there are different districts. There's a housing district, there's an economic development district, there's a soils district, which is pretty uncommon. The creme de la creme is the redevelopment district, because that's got the longest timeline. And it's also got the most guardrails on it, and when you can use it and how you can use it. But it's all defined on what type of district it is, and it's all in the statute. So, tax abatement. I tried to be cute, and I tried to do a who, what, why, when, and how. They don't all line up perfectly, but it kind of tries to put it into different buckets. So, who gets to do tax abatements? And that's political subdivisions. Cities, counties, school districts, and towns. Note that EDAs are not on here because EDAs do not actually have abatement authority. The city itself has abatement authority, so EDAs don't have that, but it's the political subdivisions of the state. They're the ones that have abatement authority. What does tax abatement come from? Where does the ability come from? And that's from the legislature. And it's Minnesota Statute 46.9, 1812 through 469.1815. Just a side note, cities and political subdivisions, statutory cities, are creatures of the state, so we don't have any authority that isn't granted to us by the state. So we can't just go and do tax abatement because we want to, we go and do tax abatement because the state says we can. So just to, cities are creatures of the state, we can only do what we're told we can do. And what it does is it redirects some or all of the subdivision's share of the parcel taxes, again, on a parcel by parcel basis. And I think the word redirect is important because we still collect them, but then we just redirect them for a specific purpose, right? It's like having a second job and taking that job and taking the income from that and dedicating it to a specific purpose. And so the redirection word is important. Now, why would a city do abatement? They do it because the state wants us to have the tool in order to advance a public purpose that promotes local economic growth. This public financing tool is supposed to be brought out when there is a project that can help promote local economic growth. And in exchange for that public financing, the landowner agrees that they will develop the land in a way that will promote that economic development. So we'll give you abatement in exchange for you helping us with the public benefit of whatever the project is, whether it's access to service, whether, we'll get into that in a when. But in exchange, you do this for us and we'll do that for you. When do we do it? Statute is very clear that the council has to believe that the benefits of the abatement are equal to or exceed the cost of the abatement itself. Now, this gets a little wonky because the benefits aren't always financial, right? So, because there are public benefits that come with that. And that speaks to the next bullet, which is it must serve the public good in one of or more of these ways, and that's increasing or preserving the tax base, right? So if a company were going to pull the plug and go someplace else, abatement could be offered in order to keep the tax base present. Redeveloping blighted areas, we've got a declining tax base. Maybe you want to use abatement because it's a little bit simpler rather than using tax increment financing. Providing employment opportunities, job creation, right? Construction of public facilities. So if a developer or a company wants to extend public utilities or facilities in order to make their project work, because they don't currently have it, let's say, abatement can be used to pay for those. And also access to service. Access to service is a super broad one, and there really isn't a great definition within the statute, but generally it's considered things like transit, addressing food deserts, right? So building a grocery store where a grocery store isn't for a long time. Bringing on pharmacies where there's a clinic where medical services are, having broadband or childcare, those kinds of services. So it's really kind of a catch-all, but access to services is one. And then how is it done? Again, the word redirect. Taxes are collected by the county. The county gives the city the taxes that they collected on the parcel. The city then takes those taxes and redirects them to pay for the eligible costs, typically rebating or giving back to the developer or to the bondholder. So the money's, or the money can be used directly. We could take the money and pay for the public benefit, the public infrastructure ourselves. But that's pretty typical. We like to put the onus and the responsibility and the risk onto the developer rather than take it on ourselves. That was a whole lot, but at the end of the day, no matter how the municipality decides to implement the taxes, it's important to know that the taxes are still levied, they're still collected, they're still paid, as typically, but the abatement resolution that council passes when they decide to do an abatement directs how the use of the share of those abated taxes will be used. And they're paid out, retained to pay eligible costs. So they're still collected, they're still levied, they're just then redirected after they're collected. So that was a lot. Any questions on that slide on who, what, why, when, or how? If not, just wanted to reiterate, it's one of those. I've been doing this in northeastern Minnesota for going on a long time now, and there's some confusion a lot of times that you either have to meet all of these marks, or it has to be tied to public infrastructure in order to qualify, or that they have to create so many jobs, or that they have to be spending X amount of money in order to qualify, or that all of this, this is straight from the statute, they have to satisfy one of these public goods in order to qualify. So just wanted to highlight that for you. In the slide deck, it'll seem like a double slide, but I just I think it's an important note, because it gets lost in translation sometimes. So the process, just like every other important decision that council makes, there is public engagement that happens as a part of that. So a public hearing whenever an abatement is done or is being considered, when staff is bringing forward an abatement for consideration by the elected body, a public hearing has to be held that is mandated by the state. I want to note that the statute is extremely specific in how the public is noticed. And the statute says that the city must publish it in a newspaper of general circulation, and there's a definition for that, in the political subdivision, at least once, more than 10 days, but less than 30 days before the hearing. So they're very explicit in the process of how public hearings are noticed. And they're very specific in that it has to be done in a newspaper of general circulation within the political subdivision. My notes, because I have thought of this. This can sometimes be a point of contention, I think, with the public, because not many people crack open a newspaper of general circulation in the political subdivision and then look under public hearings to see if there's a public hearing for something that they might be interested in. And so I totally understand why that would be a point of frustration for some folks. This is what the law requires, and this is what the law says we have to do. Next, political subdivision proposing to abate taxes, typically the city or the town, because they're the ones that typically first engage with the developer or business when they want to do an expansion or development. That political subdivision can then request that other political subdivisions grant an abatement as well. So those would be the county and the school. Typically, schools don't participate. They don't want to give up their share, and that's understandable. Sometimes the county does. Often, actually, the county participates as well. But the city is typically, I speak on a lot of typicallys in this presentation, the city is typically the lead subdivision on the abatement process.
If the county participates and it's utilities that are being, what the abatement is for, how does the county participate in that? I mean, typically the infrastructure is the city's infrastructure, but the county's portion of the tax goes to pay to the city infrastructure?
Chair Boucher, Commissioner Baser, yes, and that's a little bit of the rub sometimes, because the county says we don't do public utilities, but again, the return on investment for abatement is not specific to that pipe, right, or the pipes, or whatever fire station, or whatever it is we need to build as part of the project. The public benefits go beyond that, whether it's the increased tax base, the portion that you're not abating, whether it's the jobs they get created, and they're going to buy houses, and they're going to hire local marketing firms and local tax attorneys, and they're going to go shopping and eat at restaurants, and so the county does see public benefit beyond just the infrastructure itself. I think, again, as Chad, the Economic Development Director, Executive Director of HEDA, I think that's where, especially in northeastern Minnesota, sometimes there's some confusion about what abatement is for. And it's not just about paying for the public infrastructure, it's about creating greater economic impact and the public good that comes from that. And that's why the statute is super specific about the public benefit being greater or equal to the cost of the abatement. It doesn't say that the cost of the pipe has to be equal to the abatement or something like that. It's just the public benefit generally.
Well, when the county participates, it just means that the city they're participating and paying for the city infrastructure.
Yep, that's right. They're helping. They're dedicating some of the tax revenues they would otherwise collect to help the city pay for public infrastructure, because they recognize that they will get benefits beyond that infrastructure itself. The statute, counties and cities that choose to grant an abatement must do so by resolution. So a resolution has to come before council and be approved after the public hearing, And then the county commission also has to approve a resolution. Typically the city is the lead organization. We have the resolution and the agreement directly with the developer of the company. And then we have a separate resolution with the county, and the county does not have a direct, if the city is involved, doesn't have a direct abatement agreement with the developer of the company, they have it with the city. So there's typically a one-step removal when it comes to the agreement. But the important part is that those resolutions adopted by council or commission specify the terms. Typically through an attached agreement. Duration, no longer than 15 years is the blanket. However, if a political subdivision reaches out to a county or a school and says, hey, we'd like to participate in this, and they say, no thanks, I'll pass, that then automatically goes to a 20-year. I don't know the thought behind that, but that's the way they did it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the abatement has to go the full 20 years. That's all a part of the negotiation. But typically, oftentimes a developer or a company wants the time even more than they want the total value. So, because the time is predictable and it allows them to have a longer finance. Typically. But again, every project is different. I can tell you that no matter what project you've ever worked on, it's always different. Limitations. Again, it's by parcel. You can't do abatement in a district. And it may reduce all or part of the property tax amount for the political subdivision on the parcel. So again, you can take either that $100,000 or you could take the full 150. Heck, you could take the full 155 if you wanted to, from that earlier example. The maximum annual amount equals the total local tax rate multiplied by the total net tax capacity. Say that 10 times fast and I will be impressed. All that really means is effectively only the amount that the parcel pays can be abated. You can't abate above and beyond for a single parcel what that single parcel generates in taxes. By a subdivision, there's a couple of caveats and limits. In any 1 year, the total amount of the property taxes abated cannot exceed either A, 10% of the net tax capacity of the subdivision in a year, or $200,000, whichever is greater. Whichever is greater is the key there. For a large city like Hermantown, Duluth, Minneapolis, obviously 10% of our net tax capacity is going to be far greater than $200,000. But for a small city, they can do up to $200,000 if their net tax capacity is lower than that. Again, I don't know where these numbers come from. I just opted over into the box.
Actually, a $2 million tax capacity, which is a small town.
Yeah, exactly. Or it could be just a town, right? It's not a city. All that to say, if you've got, again, it's all the taxes collected by the city, you're gonna pay 10% of that on a parcel by parcel basis. I don't know offhand what our tax capacity is. I should look that up for you, but, okay. So that's that. Any questions on that mental dump on a process? Sweet. Knocking it out. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to, again, I learned best. Yeah.
To clarify one thing, cities by themselves can enter into abatement without the participation of the county and vice versa.
Chair Boucher, that's correct. Cities don't even have to ask. They can just abate if the council so decides. Typically they ask, and now if they get declined, they can go up to 20 years. But you don't even have to ask. So yes, cities can do it on their own.
But that still has all of the public notice and testimony, public hearing.
Correct. It's still a public process. Noticed in the newspaper or general circulation. Next, I'll flip into some scenarios. I like to play out some scenarios. Sometimes it's a little easier to understand rather than just talking about the maximum annual amount equals the total local, but rather than doing that, play out some scenarios. So, tax abatement scenario. just gonna read these to you again, text heavy, but the intent was to be a resource, not necessarily just a presentation. And in these scenarios, I've tried to put together some graphics that will help explain it through visuals. Economic expansion, scenario number one. A business is expanding. I always love that when businesses come into my office and say, hey, I want to invest there. It's like one of my favorite things. It anticipates the expansion will invest $30 million into its property and create 20 jobs at $18 an hour. That business applies to the city and requests abatement because the cost of construction, which everybody knows are extremely elevated these days, makes expansion economically infeasible for them. The expansion will not provide a level of return necessary to be reasonable for the business. So in other words, I spend $30 million on my business, I'm not going to get the return from that $30 million that I need in order to make my shareholders or my partners or whatever whole in their investment. With a reasonable return. I think that's important to understand. It's not that it has to be a wash, they have to get a reasonable return. And that's why we have third-party consultants that help us understand what reasonable is on a project-by-project basis. The business says, I need $600,000 in order to make this project economically feasible. The city requests that the county and the school participate, and the county and the school decline. They say, we're not going to play abatement ball in this one, you're on your own. So the city then performs a fiscal analysis. We take their numbers, we take their equity, we take their debt, we take all of that information, we bring it to our third-party consultant, we work the problem with them in partnership with the third-party consultant, and we determine, yep, by golly, the project's going to have an economic impact greater than that $600,000 when it comes to job creation, when it comes to secondary investment, those kinds of things. And abating that $600,000 will not be more than 10% of the city's net tax capacity. So then staff brings it to the council for consideration. Because the expansion will increase the tax base and provide employment opportunities, it meets the statutory requirements. Staff brings it to the city council. Hopefully we've talked to you about it beforehand, so you're not surprised. City council believes that the impact of the increased annual payroll and the supply chain stimulus is going to generate a greater community benefit than the $600,000, and the council chooses to abate the taxes, approves the resolution of the agreement. The abatement term is up to 20 years because the school and the county declined, so you got the extra 5 years on the abatement, or the $600,000 that they asked for, whichever comes first. So they, in the illustration, they create $100,000 in new taxes, far exceed what was expected at the beginning. This abatement's paid off in 6 years, right? So just because it's a 20-year abatement, if the project outperforms, then you don't have to use the entire term. Or let's flip this on its head and say the project underperforms. And you go past the 20 years and they don't get their $600,000. That's too bad. They didn't get the $600,000 they said they were needed, but the 20-year term expired and they carried that risk. Again, it's whichever comes first. So they come to us, they say we're going to invest a bunch of money, we're going to create some jobs. We do some analysis. City council decides whether or not it's appropriate. Now, going to the second scenario. This one's a little bit more complicated. Developer-fronted utility extensions. A business wants to open operations in the city. They're coming from another place. It anticipates it's going to invest $100 million into the facility. And in order to construct that facility on a selected site, so typically businesses go through a pretty robust, especially if they're spending this kind of money, they go through a pretty robust site selection process, and they know that this was the site that they need, and so they need to extend the utilities to get there. They need to extend public utilities in order to make that site active. The utility extension is then estimated to be $9 million in construction-related costs. It's $9 million in hard costs, the cost of the metal, the cost of the labor, the cost of digging the holes, that kind of stuff. For illustration purposes, if the city were to build those public utilities on their own, a 20-year debt service equivalent to that improvement is $13 million. So if, the city wanted to go out, bond it 4% rate, even though the 10-year T-note's bumping up, so it's probably higher than that these days. They go out and they bond for it, they're actually gonna pay the equivalent of $13 million. And so that $13 million is an important number for later on. The business applies to the city and requests abatement because the cost of constructing utilities makes the project economically infeasible. The investment in the public utilities will not, and the project will not provide a level of return necessary to be reasonable. The business is willing to construct those utilities, and once those utilities are built, the company will then turn them over to the city to be a publicly owned asset. They go out, they put in the sewer, they put in the water, they put in all the fire hydrants, and then they build a water tower, whatever the case might be. When they're done building it, they give the keys over to the city and they say, here you go, this is all yours. Cost us $9 million. You would have paid 13, but it cost us 9. The city requests that the county and the school participate. The school says, no thanks, but the county's willing to play ball. The city performs a fiscal analysis, so even though the county is part of it, typically the city is still the one that goes through the third-party consultant in partnership with them. They determine that if the city bonded for the utility extension, as I said at the top, the 20-year debt service total would be $13 million. That's principal, the $9 million, plus the interest and the issuance of the bond, the cost to issue the bonds. Because that utility will be city-owned, the city evaluates a $6 million the city is evaluating a $6 million contribution from the developer, while the county is the $6 million is from the city, while the county evaluates a $1.8 million. And to your point, Commissioner Geisler, oftentimes the county comes in less, sometimes significantly less because it's not their pipe, but they do want to help stimulate. The economy. The county and the city determine that the project will create more than their contributions and economic impact, and that abating the requested amount will not be more than 10% of either subdivision. Right? It won't be more than, because the county is limited by the same 10% of their tax base as well, their net tax capacity. So the city and the county combined will reimburse that developer for $7.8 million via abatement. $9 million in construction costs, $13 million in total cost. They'll reimburse $7.8 million. That puts the developer's net unreimbursed contribution at 1.2, right? The difference between 7.8 and 9, so that's their net contribution. The developer will deliver the infrastructure and carry the bond cost. They're carrying the risk and the bond cost of a $13 million debt service equivalent. The city and county choose to reimburse the developer for the cost of the public infrastructure over 20 years by redirecting a portion of the city, of the new city and county tax revenue created by the project. That abatement term is 20 years, or that $7.8 million cap that was agreed upon, whichever comes first. The thing to highlight on this is a performance-based repayment, as we talked about before. If the project doesn't generate the forecasted tax revenues, the city doesn't pay them the abatement. The developer, not the taxpayer, carries the $13 million debt risk, right? They build it, typically they take out debt to build it, they carry the risk of that debt. All we're doing is redirecting some taxes to help offset the cost of building utilities, using the taxes that they created by their project, right? So I've got some visuals on the left. Started at the $5,000 base tax rate. They created $285,000 in taxes. We dedicated $200,000 a year, still collected $85,000 a year. And then I didn't do the math to come up to this is city only, whatever, 200. I'm not an Excel guy, I'm not a fast math guy. But, however long it takes for 200,000 to hit $6 million, which is going to be less than 20 years. Again, the table breaks it down. The actual cost of the work is $9 million, but the total cost of the debt, including interest, issuance, finance, all that stuff, is $4 million. Total value of the utility improvement is $13 million. So to make that just a little simpler in a graphic, county abatement on the top is 1.8, city abatement is $6 million, and considering the carrying and financing gap, the timing and the interest, the developer's carrying a $5.2 million risk on the debt. Again, private entity builds the public infrastructure at their sole cost and expense. They've gotta carry all the insurance, they gotta carry like all that stuff, offloaded from the city. And then repayment is made by the obligated, new city tax revenues. In this instance, if the city were to build the public infrastructure, that would come out of the general levy, and we would have to levy for that, and it would increase the levy and the cost to the general tax base, right? General tax base would then pay those bond costs. In this instance, we get the public infrastructure without any new taxes, being put on current taxpayers, because you're capturing only the abated, only the taxes created by the project to pay off, the public utility. So, a little bit more complicated, right? But this is the model most northeastern Minnesota folks think of. We participate because you're building us a pipe and you're gonna give us a pipe at the end of the day. Though, to be clear, it's not the only model. So, that was a whole lot. Before I flip to the next page, are there any thoughts on, or questions on, the two scenarios? Again, I'm focused on development scenarios, not necessarily the other ways that it can be used.
Wade and I were around for it, but maybe the others don't know, but, we did tax abatement with Fleet Farm. It would be fun to look at the real world, rather than a, fictitious scenario. Look at that scenario. I believe we just talked the other night about it. It's gonna be paid in 26, all of it. And it would be fun to go back and look how much it was, what was it projected to be, and how much quicker did it get paid than projected.
Sure.
It'd be fun to just kind of look at those numbers.
Chair Boucher, Commissioner Geisler, we've also got a tax increment financing district on the Holiday Inn, and we have abatement on the pillars. And it's really good municipal, practice just to go and, do a reevaluation of those public financing and see how they perform. And so I've been, talking to finance about, getting others to help us with that. Eller's being a third-party public finance consultant. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how, the city of Hermantown, because we really haven't done very many. It would be interesting to see. We did do a tax increment financing district on Deerfield at one point, but that was quite a while ago. It's always interesting to deconstruct them, so we can certainly work toward that.
It'd be fun to see.
Yeah, I agree. Didn't have time to do that for this presentation.
That's all right.
You haven't done it yet?
Yeah.
Maybe Tom's listening right now. So just a side-by-side comparison of the two scenarios. Starting scenario one, economic expansion. Is this a tax break? Effectively, yeah, this is a tax break. It functions as a tax rebate on the new value created by the project. It's not a reduction in existing tax obligations. So they're building something, we rebate them some of their new taxes that they created. Effectively, that's a tax break. So why would a city or a county or potentially a school district give a tax break to a public or to a private company? The way I think of it is by sharing the future revenues, right? By sharing the revenues we've created through the partnership of the investment in the project. It provides an economic incentive. This is where I use the actual word incentive. Incentive to invest in the local economy. We want to incentivize you to be here, so we're going to participate in your financials and we're going to give you a tax rebate to do that. Another reason is that multiplier effect I talked about. You've got a business that grows and expands, they then hire local. Local business is far more likely to hire locally, so you invest in them, and then those local tax consultants or marketers are likely to hire locally too. So a lot of times you'll hear that in a investment in this project will create X amount of dollars in economic impact. That economic impact is then broken down into direct spending, indirect spending, direct number of jobs created, indirect number of jobs created. So all of those metrics is how you kind of evaluate the multiplier effect. But supply chain activity, all of that stuff. So it's not just about the dollars that you're sharing, it's also about the dollars that are a lot harder to track that happen as a result of that investment and that expansion. I did business development, this is fancy way of saying sales. I did business development for a number of years often talked about opportunity cost. In fact, my salary was often pointed out to me by my bosses as opportunity cost. And so opportunity cost is where you make an investment in order to make other opportunities happen, right? And I would put abatement in the same bucket. It's an opportunity cost. If you don't do the abatement, then there is no project, and there's no increased property taxes, and the parcels remain at that, I'm just gonna call it $300 a year, rather than getting the benefits that come with the investment. I think a good comparable to this, people are really familiar with grants, people are really familiar with loan guarantees. Government steps up and says, hey, we'll back your loan, if you can't make the payment, we will, that helps them get lower rates, that helps them get the financing. People are more familiar with those. This is very similar to that. Tax abatement is arguably, though, more fiscally conservative even than those two common things, because the taxes are only redirected if the project generates the value. If I came to council and said, hey, council, we want to do $1 million loan to X business, we don't have $1 million loan floating out there, right? We have $1 million in cash sitting in the market, and we risk not getting that $1 million back. On a tax abatement deal, we're only going to give them what they make, right? So it's arguably more conservative even than a loan. Second scenario, developer-funded utility extension. Is this a tax break? Arguably, it's not a tax break. You're not providing them with an incentive here. It's a developer-funded, publicly owned project, right? The abatement repays the developer for a publicly owned utility asset. Essentially, the private industry is funding a public works project, so it's not a private subsidy. Repayment is only made by redirection of the new city county taxes, potentially school revenues attributed to the project. The developer carries the risk, again, the construction risk, the financing risk, the performance risk, all of that stuff is on them. We offload that, and we get the benefit of not having to carry that risk for that project simply by repaying them over time with their own money. Should the project underperform, again, as we just talked about, less value than forecasted, then the developer absorbs that gap, not the taxpayer. So the taxpayer is protected in a way where if we issue a bond and we carry all that risk and it underperforms, and we got to levy for that. It's arguably it's not a tax break. So why should we repay a developer? Why don't we just say, hey, developer, you're going to benefit from this, you should pay for this. You want to do business in our town, that's the cost of doing business, right? Because without the abatement, the combined cost again of the private construction plus the cost of the public infrastructure makes it economically prohibitive. They're gonna say, okay, well here I gotta build $13 million worth of $9 million worth of public infrastructure. I can go down to Wilmer where they got nice flat cornfields and utilities that directly serve the parcel already. I don't have to pay those costs. I can build down there. And it's easier for me to justify workforce costs than it is for me to justify building a utility. Without the abatement, it's not economically prohibitive. I didn't even pick on Wilmer benefits from that. And then the community gains that permanent public utility at no upfront cost to taxpayers, which eliminates the impact to the general levy. So why would we do this? Because they're going to build it for us and then they're going to hand it over to us. And typically the abatement is less than the actual cost of the pipe once you consider the carrying cost, the financing costs, and all that stuff. So regardless of whether or not we consider tax abatement a tax break, we can argue semantics all day long. The statute states that the benefits of the proposed abatement must be greater than or equal to its cost. So even if it is a tax break, even if you want to call it a tax break, the community has to at least break even or stand to gain more than what you're giving in that arguable tax break anyway. So that's the comparison side by side. Moving on, because I know Commissioner Jelly has to go very soon. We do have a business subsidy policy. In 2025, the City Council adopted an updated business subsidy policy, BSP, because it's easier. That's posted on HEDA's website, so anybody that wants to access the process, the policy, the application, all that stuff, it's on HEDA's website. This policy serves as the overarching framework and the governing document for all business subsidies, so it's not just about abatement, it also includes TIF, it also includes if we were to do a loan guarantee or a grant. This is the subsidy policy that governs all that. Provides specifics on the tax abatement financing, which we affectionately call TAF, as an addendum to that overarching document, if you all recall. And it really what it does is it lays out not just what the statute says for public benefit, but we have a more robust and specific list of what we want to see as a city in order to qualify. So we've gone kind of a notch above what statute requires. The policy limits the use of TAF to be within the geography identified by the hatch marks, and that's within the policy as well. These are what the city identified as priority growth areas for us. They largely match the comp plan that was adopted for the 2045 comp plan. And again, the adoption of this policy went through a public process too. It came to a city council meeting, and it was done in a public process as well. Some of the uses we identify: industrial development, manufacturing, commercial development, expansion, redevelopment, rehabilitation. Called out some specific types of housing. One thing, tax increment financing, especially the economic development districts, can't be used for retail, so we need to put retail in here for ours as well, because there aren't a lot of options for retail. And then just as a closing note, because this is the Economic Development Authority, the authority does not have abatement granted to it by the state. The Economic Development Authority can't grant abatement. It would not, that abatement would not come from you. That has to be approved by the city council. And it has to be done after a public hearing. So the public would be noticed and would come before council. So, but being as this is economic financing tool, I thought the EDA was an appropriate place to give that presentation. So that concludes Director Ronchetti's education series on tax abatement. I'd be happy to sit for questions if there are any. But again, I will email this to the council. We will also post this presentation as a part of the minutes for the meeting, so it will be available to the public via the minutes. But happy to answer any questions if there are any from the commission right now.
I was just gonna ask who the third-party consultant is, but you answered that. Somebody like Ellers or somebody who does that type of consulting with the city.
Yep, it's Ellers. For us, Ellers is very well respected. They serve a tremendous amount. I think, I'm not even going to throw it out there in stats. They had told me one time how many cities they actually work for, but it's a lot. Ellers is extremely reputable, and they're very good at what they do. And they school me on the regular when talking about these programs. So I'm really grateful to have them. They're well worth the rate we pay. So they're also our bond consultants. So when we do bond issuance and those kinds of things, we go to Freiberger on the attorney side, but then we use Ellers for the bond issuance and stuff too. So that's who that is. Any other questions on David Archett or any other public financing tools in general?
Thank you, this is really good.
Happy to do it. I live and breathe this stuff, so.
So will we be at a future time getting something similar to this on TIP?
Chair Boucher, yes, I would like to put one of those together. Yes, I would like to put one of those together. Those are a little bit more complex, but might not get you out before 7 on that one, but just kidding. Yeah, I'd like to put one of those together.
Because they are different in how they're implemented. The people involved can be different. We could with TIP district enforce it on them, but we can't with tax abatement. Little things like that.
Yeah, President Boucher, that's correct. The city makes that determination. And doesn't just collect the city and the county, it also collects the school. And so, you know, and not having, they don't have a choice, we notice that, when we tell them we're gonna do it, there's a process for that. But they don't, we just need to do it. So, yeah, that'll be one of the distinctions. It's a good call.
In that distinction, schools don't participate typically in abatement. Can we exempt school districts from it too?
Mr. Boucher, I don't know the answer to that.
I know that we do it, enforce it, but does it?
I think you can.
Can we exempt the county or exempt the school?
I'm not sure, I'd have to look at the statute, no, I don't think so, actually.
I don't know the answer to
But
that.
we can get the answer
I
quickly.
think there were some TIF projects in Duluth where the school did not participate, so
Okay.
could be wrong.
But it may have been that the school district was reimbursed somehow for what they lost. Something like
Yeah.
Awesome. It is important to note, you know, you are only capturing creative taxes, right? So technically the school isn't losing anything, because you can't lose something you didn't have.
Yeah.
But they, yeah, they don't gain it, right? But I can find out.
that. Well, you can add that into the
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah. Great. That's the end of my presentation, and nothing further on the
Any
agenda.
questions or comments from board members? And I will entertain a motion to recess.
Motion to recess.